I would mention to all of our brethren down in the United States, I am a dual national. I'm not ashamed to say I was born an American. I probably about as American as you get. One of my ancestors, James Wilson, who was the grandfather of James Wilson Patton, my direct ancestor, actually signed the Declaration of Independence in the United States of America, and he signed the Constitution and was on the first Supreme Court to the United States. So I'm not ashamed to be an American from that standpoint. I'm also proud to be a Canadian and to be a Canuck from that standpoint. I took my oath to the Queen now, what is it, 7 years ago? Yeah, it's perfect. It's 7 years ago. And I took my oath of citizenship and pledged my allegiance also to the Queen. That's what you do to become a Canadian citizen, by the way, is you pledge your allegiance to the Queen, both in English and in French, which is very interesting. So greetings to all of our American brethren who are down there. I have a sermon. I want to talk to you today about something that's very important. We are, as Carl mentioned, we are living in just quite treacherous times in many ways. I know it's hard for us sometimes here on Vancouver Island to think that our lives could be turned upside down, but truly they could. And, we are subject very closely to what goes on in the world as a whole, just from the standpoint if we're concerned about what we put on our dinner table to eat, if for no other reason. On this island where we used to produce 50 years ago, we used to produce 85% of our food here. We grew it locally here on the island. These days, we only produce, the estimate is 3 to 10%. 3 to 10%. So just think about eating 90% less. Would everyone please think about what it would be like for you to eat 90% less as of tomorrow? What would that feel like to eat 90% less food? Might feel like you were in Haiti. This could happen. We are subject very closely to being part of the distribution network. If there are major disruptions in the distribution network that go up the West Coast and come east to west in Canada, we're sort of like at the end of the pipeline. And if the pipeline gets broken somewhere along the way, we could do a lot less eating and we wouldn't have to worry about our diet, except, being overweight. We might have to worry about getting enough calories just to survive. Of course, you could talk to Jerry Jansen about surviving in a case like that. He was in a concentration camp in Russia, spent most of the World War II in a concentration camp in Russia, which is interesting. The Germans had their concentration camps and the Russians had their concentration camps, okay? You put a little boy in a concentration camp with his mother, they're big enemies of the state, They do a lot less eating. Things can happen in this world, and, things can change. And the world is changing. Today, over in Italy, we see we're having a major... Italy sometimes has, it's not the fact of a government fall or something like this. They've had actually fairly stable governments over the last number of years. But they've had a man named Berlusconi who's been in charge of their government, and he unfortunately does not have clean hands. Mr. Berlusconi has a couple lawsuits against him currently pending in the courts, and if you're in charge of the government and you have a majority in Parliament, what do you do if you have legal problems? Well, as it turns out, you start to change the laws. I mean, that's a logical thing, right? You change the laws so you can't be sued anymore. Your case gets dropped. Is that justice? In Italy, dozens of Italian judges have walked out of the courts in protest of Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi's judicial reforms, which they call destructive. Judges left ceremonies to start the beginning of the judicial year as a government official began speaking. They said they are fed up with Mr. Berlusconi's threats against them, because he's been threatening the judges. The Prime Minister, who faces 2 court cases, says judges are communists, who are trying to depose him through the legal system. Of course, you know, if you remember Adolf Hitler, one of his big things of how he managed to charm the Western leaders, the Prime Minister of Britain, Mr. Baldwin and Mr. Chamberlain, and the government officials there in France and in Belgium and the Netherlands and wherever else they were throughout Europe at that time, was that, we will defend you against the communists. Nazism is so much better than communism. Wrong. What's the difference? If you're a slave to one, you're a slave to the other. But the Prime Minister, anyways, has been calling the judges communists who wanted to depose him through the legal system. The Italian Parliament, dominated by Mr. Berlusconi's supporters, is currently examining the legislation, which includes provisions to curb the length of legal cases. Opponents say it would, in effect, stop these two trials, but the Prime Minister denies that it's tailor-made just to suit his situation. Just coincidence. You know, so I guess they've been calling, the judges say that Berlusconi and his supporters have been calling them an execution squad, a sewer, cancer, metastasis. These are some of the words that they use to describe the judges of Italy. I would imagine this might cause you to get up and make a protest or two and to walk out. Justice and judgment is very critical to any society if we're going to preserve individual liberty. 7 years ago today, to the day 7 years ago, on January 30th, 2003, a verdict was handed down in the by U.S. District Court Judge William Young. He was handing down a verdict in regards to Mr. Richard C. Reid, the infamous shoe bomber. You know, the terrorists started in 2003 with trying to load up somebody's shoes with explosives, and by 2009 they'd moved up to somebody's underwear. I don't know where these Islamic terrorists are going to go next. You know, they start with your shoes, they go up to your underwear. I feel sorry for the poor patsies they get to do this stuff. I really do. Anyways, on January 30th, 2003, Judge Young said this. He said, Mr. Reid, Mr. Richard C. Reid, hearken now to the sentence the court imposes on you. On counts 1, 5, and 6, the court sentences you to life in prison in the custody of the United States Attorney General. On counts 2, 3, 4, and 7, the court sentences you to 20 years in prison on each count, the sentence on each count to run consecutive with the other. That's 80 years, Mr. Reid. The court imposes upon you for each of the 8 counts a fine of $250,000 for the aggregate fine of $2 million. The court accepts the government's recommendation with respect to restitution and orders a restitution in the amount of $298.17 to Andre Bousquet. I'm not sure. I guess maybe he ruined his clothes trying to tackle the shoe bomber or deal with him. And $5,784 to American Airlines, of course, with the least that you could say is they had to go out and put up a pile of air purifiers and probably replace a seat or two. The court imposes upon you the $800 special assessment. The court imposes upon you 5 years supervised release simply because the law requires it. And the life sentences are real life sentences, so I need to go no further. So, supervised release, you know, good luck, you know. This is this is a sentence that is provided for you by our statutes. It is a just and fair sentence. It is a righteous sentence. Let me explain this to you. We are not afraid of any of your terrorist co-conspirators, Mr. Reid. We are Americans. We have been through the fire before. There is all too much war talk here, and I say that to everyone with the utmost respect, here in this court, where we deal with individuals as individuals and care for individuals, as human beings, we reach out for justice. You are not an enemy combatant. You are a terrorist. You are not a soldier in any war. you are a terrorist. To give you that reference, to call you a soldier, gives you far too much stature. Whether it's the officers of the government who do it, or your attorney who does it, or that happens to be your view, you are a terrorist. And we do not negotiate with terrorists. We do not sign documents with terrorists. See, it's just like it was people thought that signing documents and treaties with Hitler was meaningful in some way. It was not meaningful. It was a delusion. We hunt them down one by one and bring them to justice. I guess the Israelis, at least the Palestinians, Hamas is accusing the Israelis of doing exactly that this week. I think in, where was it? One of the Arab Emirates. Doha? I think it was one of these places that they caught up with this one particular terrorist who had kidnapped and killed and orchestrated suicide bombings. He ended up, I guess, in his hotel room touching something wrong, and he got electrocuted quite remarkably. And they're, of course, saying that the Mossad caught up with him. The Israelis, of course, don't talk on this sort of thing. But if you study the Mossad, of course, they do have a court. They just don't go out, somebody decides. They actually go through a judicial proceeding and decide that somebody is worthy of death. Among their opponents, they will eventually meet out the sentence. But they have to be worthy of death before they deliver it. So war talk is way out of line in this talk. You are a big fellow, but you are not that big. You're no warrior. I know warriors. You are a terrorist, a species of criminal guilty of multiple attempted murders. In a very real sense, Trooper Santiago had it right when you were first taken off the plane and into custody, and you wondered where the press and the TV crews were. And he said, "You're no big deal. You're no big deal." What your counsel, what your able counsel, and what the equally able United States attorneys have grappled with, and what I have, as honestly as I know how, tried to grapple with, is why you did something so horrific. What is it that led you here to this courtroom today? I have listened respectfully to what you have had to say. I have asked you to search your heart and ask yourself what sort of unfathomable hatred led you to do what you are guilty, admit you are guilty of doing. And I have an answer for you. It may not satisfy you, but as I search this entire record, it comes to as close to understanding as I know. It seems to me you hate the one thing that is most precious. You hate our freedom, our individual freedom. Our individual freedom to live as we choose, to come and go as we choose, and to believe or not believe as we individually choose. Here in this society, the very winds carry freedom. They carry it everywhere from sea to shining sea. It is because we prize that freedom so much that you are here in this beautiful courtroom, so that everyone can see truly that justice is administered fairly, individually, and discreetly. It is for freedom's sake. It is a measure of our own liberties. Make no mistake, though, it is yet true that we will bear any burden, pay any price to preserve our freedoms. Look around this courtroom, mark it well. The world is not going to long remember what you or I say here. Day after tomorrow, it will be forgotten. But this, however, will long endure. Here in this courtroom and courtrooms across America, the American people will gather to see that justice, individual justice, not war, individual justice is in fact being done. Well, we could say that true as well here in Canada. Justice. You know, one of the things that is most important these days, when we think about this, and something that many who call themselves Christians and in churches that call themselves Christian churches have forgotten or do not speak very much about, is the judgment of God. The judgment of God. God is a God of justice. He is interested in what is right, what is true. He's also interested in true liberty. And to establish true liberty, you must establish justice. You cannot have one without the other. God does generally, the elements of divine judgment include what? There are several elements. They include a warning, time to respond, a way to escape, a time for mercy. You know, as we are getting close, because Passover is now at this point in time a little under 2 months from now, we need to reflect a little bit on the message of what justice is. We need to do that bit of repenting, because we should live in a repentant state, and we need to renew our commitment to what is true and what is good and what is just. This is very important that we do this in the Church of God, because we live in a world where we cannot take the freedoms, the liberties that we have right now for granted. This is not a sermon necessarily about prophecy, although justice and what God has to say about it is prophetic in many ways. But the society we live in and the characteristics that we enjoy may not long endure in the course of the struggle against terrorism and the course of how we struggle with, because we're still not out of this whole thing with our financial insecurities. You know, just a year ago, it looked like our entire global financial system was going to collapse. We're still not out of the woods on that. That may be surprising when everybody's thinking things are going just great at this point in time, but if you listen to what's been going on over in Switzerland this past week, you will realize that we still have much work to do if we're going to be free from the threats of international financial systems collapse. And a lot of this has to do with establishments of justice and equity, because there is a lot that was done that is not just. God judges. He judges in order to establish justice, and he judges in order to establish righteousness. I found the District Judge William Young's statement, he is talking about a righteous justice, a righteous sentence. I was a little surprised, because in some ways that is very spiritual, very religious talk. Not disappointed, but surprised here in the 21st century that I have a judge who would say something like that. Let's go to Genesis chapter 18 and verse 20. Why does God judge? Let's take a look at what the Bible actually has to say here and consider this. Genesis 18 and in verse 20, and I'll be reading here, I guess in my quotes here, I have in this New King James Version, and I think a little bit out of the New Living Translation today. Maybe a bit of the Amplified Bible as well today. Verse 17, Genesis 18. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing?" Remember last week we talked about friendship. God is our friend. Abraham was God's friend. Verse 18, since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. Yeah, that's really happened, hasn't it, when you think about it? You think about the United States, you think about Canada and Australia and Britain and France and Israel. You think about the blessings that these places have been for other people, such as in Haiti. They've been a great blessing. Other nations have been greatly blessed. It's the outgoing concern. Verse 19, for I have known him, I have known Abraham, in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord, to do what? Righteousness, which is right standing in God's eyes, doing what God finds to be right. See, it's not self-righteous, it's not on my own. Our world is very self-righteous right now. We live in a very self-righteous world, but true righteousness that is not self-righteousness is that which God establishes us and holds as what is right. So he's saying about Abraham that he would teach his children to keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness, godly righteousness, and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. See, if a people is going to live with God, a people who are going to be God's friends, they must establish righteousness and live it, and justice. It must be in our lands. It must be in our dealings with each other. It must be in a fundamental part of our community. So that the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. See, it's a key element in prophetic realization and fulfillment. If a people does not do righteousness and justice, well, good things aren't going to follow. If a people are going to do which is unrighteousness and injustice, then bad things are going to follow. So the Lord said to Abraham, I have heard a great outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah because their sin is so flagrant. I'm going down to see if their actions are as wicked as I've heard. See, he doesn't want just secondhand reports. God actually went down to see for himself. It was as bad as he was hearing about it from his messengers. If not, I want to know. The other men turned and headed toward Sodom, but the Lord remained with Abraham. And Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away both the righteous and the wicked? Suppose you find 50 righteous people living there in the city. Will you sweep it away and not spare it for their sakes? Surely you wouldn't do such a thing, destroying the righteous among the wicked. Why, you would be treating the righteous and the wicked exactly the same. Surely you wouldn't do that. Should not the judge of all the earth do what is right? Abraham is saying. He recognized that the Lord of the Bible, the Lord of hosts, the I Am, who later on appeared to Moses, the one who became Jesus Christ, was the judge of all the earth. He recognized that. He saw that. Our societies right now don't recognize that God is the judge of all the earth, the judge of Canada, the ultimate judge of the acts of our government here in Canada and of our Prime Minister and Parliament, or of the American President and Congress. He is the ultimate judge on whether the actions are righteous and whether it is justice that we practice or whether it is unrighteousness and evil that we practice. And Abraham, in trying to argue with God at this point in time, coming before the judge of all the earth, is saying, look, one of your principles is you're not going to treat the righteous just like the wicked. That's a key point in talking about why God establishes justice and righteousness, because he's going to make a distinction between those who serve him and those who do not serve him. That is a message you are not hearing in your standard pulpits on Sunday. You will not hear that message. God makes a difference between those who serve him and those who do not serve him. Surely you wouldn't do that, Abraham says. Should not the judge of the earth do what is right? So he's appealing to him. And the Lord replied, if I find 50 righteous people in Sodom, I will spare the city for their sake. Then Abraham spoke again, since I've begun, let me speak further to my Lord, even though I am but dust and ashes. Suppose that there are only 45 righteous people rather than 50. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And the Lord said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 righteous people there. Then Abraham pressed his request further. Suppose there are only 40. And the Lord replied, I will not destroy it for the sake of the 40. Please don't be angry, my Lord, Abraham pleaded. Let me speak. Suppose only 30 righteous people are found. And the Lord replied, I will not destroy it if I find 30. Then Abraham said, since I have dared to speak to the Lord, let me continue. Suppose there are only 20. So just imagine Abraham there before the judge of all the world in a courtroom, and he's sitting, if you would, in your mind, and Abraham is pleading for his client. He has a client he has in mind, by the way. Is where he was a lawyer pleading for his client. And the Lord replied, I will not destroy it for the sake of 20. Finally, Abraham said, Lord, please don't be angry at me if I speak one more time. Suppose only 10 are found there. And the Lord replied, then I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. Why hasn't the day of judgment, the time of Israel's trouble, not come yet? There are many people, if you pause, if you search around the internet a little bit, who are amazed that the U.S. dollar hasn't totally tanked and become worth less than the toilet paper in your standard restroom. Many people can't understand, why things are popping along, just somehow we're just muddling along. But what will happen if the U.S. dollar tanks and becomes worth less value than your standard piece of hygienic tissue. Chaos will happen. Chaos will happen. And to solve the chaos, people will surrender their liberty to a government that will promise to protect them, and they will become slaves and lose their rights. And in the course of the chaos, everything will be thrown upside down. And here on this island, where we depend upon 90% of our food from coming elsewhere, we will just have to tighten our belts a lot if we lose 90% of our food. God is being merciful. Why? Why hasn't the day of judgment? Why hasn't the time of Israel, the prophesied time of Israel's trouble that was prophesied to come upon this whole earth, now why hasn't it come yet? Why have things been so slow, quote unquote? Judgment is central. It is a core reason why the Bible's God does what he does. Let's go to Psalm 9, Psalm chapter 9, and let's look at verse 1. And I'll read this out of the Amplified Version. This is a Psalm of David. Psalm 9, verse 1. I will praise you, O Lord, with my whole heart. I will show forth, recount. I will tell aloud all your marvelous works and your wondrous deeds. I will rejoice in you and be in high spirits. I will sing praises to your name, O Most High. When my enemies turned back, they stumbled and perished before you. You have maintained my right and my cause. You sat on the throne judging righteously. You have rebuked the nations. You have destroyed the wicked. You have blotted out their name forever and ever. The enemy have been cut off and have vanished in everlasting ruins. You have plucked up and overthrown their cities. The very memory of them has perished and vanished. But the Lord shall remain and continue forever. He has prepared and established his throne for judgment. He has prepared and established his throne for judgment. He will judge the world in righteousness. That means he's going to judge it with rightness and equity. He won't be bought off. He will be merciful. He'll even spare society its punishment if there is a remnant in it. He will minister justice to the peoples in uprightness. The Lord also will be a refuge and a high tower for the oppressed. And we heard from our brother Carl, is periodically coming out of Europe, where they want to force you into a traditional mode of what they feel is religion. The Lord will also be a refuge and a high tower for the oppressed, a refuge and a stronghold in times of trouble. Times of trouble. the marginal rendering of this can be times of high cost, times of destitution, times of desperation. Sounds like hyperinflation when all of a sudden your currency is worth less and less. All these fiat currencies that the values are just whatever the bank tries to say it is. Then you're trying to say, I want to buy a loaf of bread. So we'll put it all in a wheelbarrow and bring it here, and maybe I'll give you one. Times of high cost, of destitution, desperation. What's currently going on in our financial system could lead us to this very clearly. Let's go to Psalm 89. Psalm 89, verse 14. God does judge righteously, and he will cut off the wicked. This past week, our church website in Tyler, Texas, at the international headquarters, was attacked and hacked and destroyed. And fortunately, they were thinking in Tyler and had been thinking that they needed to do a refreshing of their website, and so they had a new one that they'd been working on. So they had to launch a new, what they had in holding in reserve to bring out a new, version. They had to launch it before they were fully ready, but so they would have something up there. Yeah. We know that these sorts of things go on all the time. I mean, people hack the websites in China and the government websites in China. They hack the websites in Iran. They hack the websites. There's all sorts of cyber warfare going on already. Different places, people trying stuff. Well, our corporate headquarters website was hacked and destroyed. And they had to work very hard, I guess, this week in Tyler to get something new up. Psalm 89, in verse 14, it says this: Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Mercy and loving kindness and truth go before your face. Blessed, that is happy, fortunate, to be envied, are the people who know the joyful sound, who understand and appreciate the spiritual blessings symbolized by the feasts. They walk, O Lord, in the light and favor of your countenance. Because God is a God of justice. He says the righteousness and justice are the foundations of his throne. We should rejoice in this because it's good news for us. It's good news for the people of God. Because we do have our enemies. You don't have to read very long in the Bible. We're coming up to Purim. We have this whole thing. This thing's, enemies popping up from time to time to try to kill everybody who's doing what God wants them to do. This is a recurrent theme because, unfortunately, Satan the devil is alive and well. And we have to deal with the fallout in every generation. We will have to deal in our generation with the same sort of thing. And we will respond to it with righteousness and justice. And that's what how we will respond. Now, who is it who judges? Because there is one who judges. It's really interesting. Jesus is the one who's going to judge, not the Father. Let's go to John chapter 5 and verse 22. John chapter 5 and verse 22. Jesus said this, and now this is a part of Jesus' ministry and of his responsibility that most Christian churches do not emphasize. They really don't. If you go to your standard place, they'll talk about, a few aspects, but they don't give you the full picture of who Jesus is and what he does. They give you a very distorted picture. So this world doesn't feel it's too important to have to pay attention to Jesus. Because he's just a wimp. He's just a guy who has nice thoughts and does little nice things. And, he's there. He'll hand out a little bit of food if you're hungry, or stuff like this. And, that's what his people are. Just, it's just sort of a nice stuff. No, there's far more to Jesus and to Jesus' ministry than merely showing, or perhaps in many cases, they're doing some nice things for people. In John 5 and verse 22, it says this. Jesus said this: Even the Father judges no one, For he has given all judgment, the last judgment, and the whole business of judging entirely into the hands of the Son, so that all men may honor, reverence, pay homage to the Son, just as they give honor to the Father. See, that would tell the Muslims that they need to honor Jesus as much, as people give, that they would honor Jesus as much as they honor the Father, whom I assume they call Allah. In fact, whoever does not honor the Son, whoever doesn't honor the Son of God, and he's making it very clear, the Son of God, that Jesus was God's Son, something that one major religion denies. The Son, whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. So it is the Son who exercises judgment, the Son of God who exercises judgment. And if you don't honor the Son of God, you don't honor the Father. So a Muslim, if you don't honor Jesus of Nazareth as the Son of God, you're not honoring Allah. That's big news. In fact, whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. Who will Jesus judge? Let's go a little farther in John 5 and verse 28. Verse 28, here in John 5. So don't be surprised. Indeed, the time is coming when all the dead in their graves will hear the voice of God's Son. And they will rise again. Those who have done good will rise to experience eternal life. And those who have continued in evil will rise to experience judgment. People like Mr. Reid. People like Osama bin Laden. People who put bombs and fill them with nails and bits of metal, then plant them in public places so they can blow up children and women and men as they innocently go about their business, will rise to experience judgment. I've got news for the terrorists of this world. You're quite eager to send everybody to hell. God is going to bring you back from hell, and you will experience judgment at the hands of Jesus. What will this be like? Jesus says in verse 30, and how will he judge? He says, I can do nothing on my own. I judge as God tells me. Therefore, my judgment is just, because I carry out the will of the one who sent me, not my own will. I suppose another, they're always free. God gives us so many different things. In this particular verse, in these verses here, we learn very clearly, verse 28, by the way, this is just an aside. For everyone who thinks when you die you go to heaven, in verse 28 makes a point that all the dead in their graves are not in heaven. That's just a freebie. People who think they die and then go to heaven, Bible teaches contrary. It's amazing how rich the Bible is and how much it contradicts the traditions of men. Let's go to Daniel 12. Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2. Again, what is coming? What is coming? Who is going to judge? Who is being judged? Who will Jesus judge? Daniel 12 and verse 2. This one's in the New Living Translation. Many of those whose bodies lie dead and buried will rise up. Because, of course, not everybody's buried. Some people, when they died, their bones, they just dropped where they were killed, and they rotted. And their bones eventually disappeared, too. You don't think in all those wars in ancient times that they buried people, or the animals kill, or that got drowned in the sea in ships that floundered, whatever it might be. Not everybody was in the dead. Many of those whose bodies lie dead and buried, of course that means all the dead, whoever they might be, wherever they are, will rise up. And it says, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting disgrace. God will give judgment. And if you are doing that which is evil, you will rise to shame and everlasting disgrace. It is prophesied. It's a shame so many people, like Mr. Reid and this latest guy who tried to blow up his underwear and whatever else, the bombers and 9/11 and all these other people who are waging war by slaughtering innocents, don't listen to this. They're not going to go to heaven and live with all their 39 or 45 or 55 or 105 or whatever it is virgins. No, they're going to experience shame and disgrace. Those who are wise will shine as bright as the sky, and those who lead many to righteousness will shine like the stars forever. But you, Daniel, keep this prophecy a secret. It's a secret. It's a secret to this world right now. It's a secret here in Canada for most people. They don't understand this. Seal up the book until the time of the end, when many will rush here and there and knowledge will increase. Well, that certainly describes our times. We can't keep track of the knowledge increasing as fast as it does. It's just exponentially growing, and people do running back and forth. Let's go to Matthew 13. Again, who is God going to justly judge? Matthew 13 and verse 40. And I'll read this in the Amplified Version. Matthew 13 and verse 40. Just as the darnel, that is weeds resembling wheat. Okay? It's funny how weeds work. You know, the best weeds are those that resemble what they're growing and to choke out. So the darnel sort of resembles wheat in the beginning stages, so it's hard to figure out, you know, where it is to pull it out. Just as darnel is gathered and burned with fire, so it will be at the close of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of offense, persons by whom others are drawn into error or sin. So all your people in your media, all your movie stars and your rock stars who are drawing people into every sort of evil behavior, anti-God behavior and thoughts, God's going to gather them out of his kingdom. And all who do iniquity and act wickedly, verse 42, and I will cast them into the furnace of fire, and there will be weeping and wailing and grinding of teeth. Then will the righteous, those who are upright and standing right with God, will shine forth like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let him who has ears to hear be listening, and let him consider and perceive and understand by hearing. You see, there is coming a time when there will be a major change. Right now, it's hard because it seems like the wicked prosper on every side, just as the psalmist would say. They seem to flourish. Our whole society is being, you know, who do we reward? In many ways, we reward the basest and most vilest of people. In many ways in media, it's what new sensationalism can you get? The latest movie, you know, what kind of, you know, how weird, how strange can you get? We do these things and various things, but there is coming a time when this is going to change. Why did the Father pick Jesus as the judge of humanity? God the Father picked Jesus as judge of humanity for well, really a simple, straightforward reason, right? He became a human. He was born in the flesh, the Virgin Mary. He lived as a human. He knew what it was like to be a human. To wake up and to be tired, to be hungry, to be weak at times. Know the stress and the strains of human life, the emotions. Know what it's loss, what it's like to lose, what it's like to be oppressed. Remember, Jesus came into a society at the time that were slaves to a foreign oppressor, a foreign invader. He understood, Jesus understands very clearly what it means to be human. In John 5 and verse 27, John 5 and verse 27, it says this. And he, that is God the Father, has given him, Jesus Christ, authority and granted him, Jesus Christ, power to execute judgment, to exercise, to practice judgment, because he is a Son of Man. He is very man. Jesus can be a good judge in the highest sense of the word good, a righteous judge, because he's one of us. He's one of us. And as you know, last week, as I said, what a friend we have in Jesus, to use the title of the old song. He is also, he calls us, his disciples, our friends. For those of you who were here last week and heard what I said. He calls us his friends. And that we know what he's doing. We know what the end result is going to be. He tells us this. Let's go to Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 17. Hebrews 2, verse 17. You know, brethren, one of the things I do want to mention, you know, our brother Fred here was just, he wanted to thank you all for everything that you've done to encourage him and Adela during this time when they've been feeling, you know, and Adela's been having her problem with her eyes. You know, it makes a difference, because we know what it's like to be in the flesh. We know how hard it is and how precious eyesight is, and when you're losing it, it's very hard. My mother is legally blind. You know, she has macular degeneration, and she's losing her eyesight. She can only see various spots around. It's hard. But just even the love that we show, you know, whether it's sending a card or these other things, it means a lot when you're going through hardship and trouble. And that's a good thing that we did. It is something that we should do in the church in showing this brotherly love and kindness. And that is the type of thing that, of course, is not lost on Jesus, and is not lost on Judgment Day. In Hebrews 2 and verse 17, I'll read here in the Amplified, it says, so it is evident that it was essential that he, Jesus, be made like his brethren in every respect, in order that he might become a merciful, a sympathetic, a faithful high priest in things related to God, to make atonement and propitiation for the people's sins. For because he himself in his humanity has suffered in being tempted, being tested and tried, he is able immediately to run to the cry, to assist and to relieve those who are being tempted, who are being tried, put through it, and who therefore are being exposed to suffering. See, Jesus was made judge of all humanity for that reason. He is a faithful judge, and he is a merciful one. You know, brethren, there's actually I've got a lot more to say on this, but I can see, you know, really I have I have got another sermon here. But we look at, when people think of judgment in many ways, we are not, God judges to fulfill his prophecy and to do what is good. He knows we're all, of course, even in his church among us, you know, we all fall short in one way or another. But because Jesus is the judge, and he is a merciful judge, he knows he judges by the attitude. And he can even be merciful to people like Osama bin Laden and all the various terrorists who have been deceived, and I would say that's appropriate, deceived into thinking what they're doing somehow gives pleasure to God. God eventually, of course, will judge the one who has caused this deception upon all humanity and mankind. They have turned away from him, the source of life, to darkness. God is going to judge. He's going to judge all humanity. And all the dead in their graves one day are going to hear the voice of the Son of God. And they're going to come forth. For those of us who are hearing today, we need to, when we come forth, in living day by day, as we prepare for the Passover, if we live in a way that is repentant in our hearts, and we're willing to change when we know we're wrong, we're willing to grow, we're willing to be kind and extend mercy to others, we know we can come forth to experience eternal life. But we should also know that those who will not do this, who will persist in doing evil and causing suffering and misery to humanity, they're going to come forth too. And there is one who will deal with them in a way that will be far more effective than any judgment and justice that a human being could mete out. Brethren, we'll continue this in talking a little bit about the judgment of God. But the judgment of God is not something that we should fear. The judgment of God is going to be that he's going to give a righteous sentence. And that's a comforting and good thing for all the things that we're going through. And it means a lot to God, the fact that there are those who will follow him. On this island, perhaps, and in this nation, and in the United States, perhaps there are the 45, or the 30, or the 20, to keep the time of judgment to come to pass. It would be nice to say or to feel that our nations were more righteous than Sodom and Gomorrah. But I have my sincere doubts that we're really any better than they were. And that's a scary thought. But the comforting thought is that the one who does the judging is the same as he was, and that we can have this boldness just as Abraham did, because we are too the friends of the judge.